Hello.
Hey Al,
Yeah.
can't hear you. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. You can hear me? I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Okay, Al, can you hear me? I can't hear you. Okay, you might be muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I'm using my iPad, and normally I'll use a different computer, and it was not making the connection.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it
Yeah.
looks like you're in a beautiful place right now.
Yeah. I'm on my back deck. They were doing some work inside the house, and I was a nuisance, and they were a nuisance to me. So I had to detach. So
Well,
here I am. And
good for
if it
you.
doesn't get too hot, the sun's fixing to come over the roof line and burn me up. And
Yeah.
it's supposed to be 95 today. So I don't know how long I'll last, but I'll be here a few minutes.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining in. I wasn't
Yeah.
sure if I would have anybody today.
So I had a minute, so I thought I'd drop in and kind of see. I'm trying to participate when I can.
Right. Well, I know it's really hard for folks. So far, when doing these Zoom meetings, I've only had, like, I think last time there were two participants, and the time before that, only one. And
Yeah.
so I just didn't know. And it's been a while since we had a meeting. I was trying to wait until I had been invited to go to the summit where the seven most western counties were getting together. That was this past weekend. And so
Okay.
I thought I might be able to have an update from there, but I had a family medical emergency and didn't get to go. So I just thought I'd at least check in with everybody and see if anybody had had any more thoughts on vetting. Um, all that I have so far is what I've sent out to everyone, which is
Yeah.
particularly for treatment providers.
Well, well, I had a question about the document that you sent in. Are, are really more are we looking at North Carolina programs? Because I'm involved with my daughter's extended care in Charleston, South Carolina, and
Mhm.
the laws are different in South Carolina that I think would make it, um, you know, would couch it in a little different way. And because I find myself involved in these things to, to kind of hold down the turf of what I think of over my career as being good treatment in a world that's gotten kind of crazy lately.
Yeah.
And sometimes the regulation, at least in North Carolina, my experience with regulation is it's so tweaked towards mental health that it does a lot of things that in a peer-driven abstinence 12-step world of recovery just is like counterproductive. And I find myself being, kind of an adversary a lot of times. In South Carolina, the laws are a little bit less restrictive as far as regulations. And so some of the things, at least what my daughter's finding in an extended care world, are just are a little different than what we have in North Carolina. So I think we're restricting our work to North Carolina, but I wanted to make sure because I'm going to press for a little bit more program orientation with those things that are being left out of the regulated environment, if we're going beyond the boundaries of North Carolina. But North Carolina's kind of locked in the regulation that we probably just have to live with.
Okay. Well, I can certainly ask that question, Al. I'm not sure. It was, I guess, just my assumption that we were just working within North Carolina, because I think you're right. Trying to go beyond that, we would really have so many different sets of
Yeah.
parameters to work through.
At least on an early, because I find my role is different if we're in a different regulatory environment, because as a physician and somebody who keeps up with the science, I try to represent my addiction medicine work as keeping people out of the myths and fake science that often is put on us by the drug companies. And yet in other environments where it's much more favorable to abstinence and 12 steps, I don't seem to need to fight those battles as often. So as long as I know what the kind of environment is going forward, I'll be fine.
Okay.
But I try hard to kind of stand up for what I have found over my career works real well in a sometimes kind of crazy environment.
Right. And I think you've done a lot of work, and it needs to be recognized as something that we should take a look at.
Yeah.
So,
well, the things I've done with the recovery book research and families and generations and 12 steps and peer empowered are all the things that seem to be left out of a highly professional regulated environment. And I'm just always waving that banner as a physician with as good an understanding of science as anybody else has, talking about how important it is, particularly in a world we live in where availability of healthcare service is really abysmal in our society now. So anyways, as long as I'm in the picture, it's
yeah.
harder to stay in denial about those things. So that's what I'm trying to do. I used to just, if there weren't a lot of people involved and big decisions made, I would just kind of go do something else. But it doesn't bother me at all just having the two of us here today, because I find out that, I can do just as much or more at kind of a small grassroots level.
Well, that's true, because when you get a lot of people involved, you can talk a lot and not get, sometimes a lot done. My feeling is I want to make sure that we're vetting people well, and not just the organizations or treatment providers that are state regulated. Because, for example, Safe Harbor, which is where I am, we're a faith-based recovery program, and so we're not licensed, but we really focus on quality, evidence-based programming along with the faith component. So I don't want us to exclude people that are doing good work that may not be regulated by the
Well, that's where I am too, because often I'll depart from the regulated environment because, it's driven by bureaucracies and drug companies that force us to do the wrong things. I mean, a lot of it's money driven when you get to that level. And I'm past the point in my life and career where the money drives my equation.
Right. And I feel that's true for us too. And it's really nice in a way, because we can make decisions to do certain things that we don't have to go back to the powers that be to get permission to do it in order to meet our payroll. We're
absolutely.
And that's I appreciate.
And there's also, one of the biggest battles I fight is the medication versus non-medication. And it's very different over here in our environment. There's such an incentive to keep people on medications because that's the pot of money you can draw from. And I've, the work I've done, I might have mentioned this last time, what I've done in England, where there's a comprehensive healthcare service, there's much more incentive to get people off of medication so you can medicate the people who are really struggling on the front end, who need good medical care. And then you transition those people to more what we've always thought of as good recovery. And they become volunteer ambassadors for the kind of recovery that works. And it's something that doesn't cost anything.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, I mean, what they told me in England and it was so strange being over here where everybody's pushing more medications when there's no evidence that there's benefit from it beyond engagement. or at least I keep asking for it, and nobody who likes medications can find any evidence to share with me, even though we talk about evidence-based. But over there, that what changed their behavior is that they've been using methadone for 60 years in England, and they were taking so much methadone to nursing homes for lifelong support of people on medications that they had no more resources to get young people off of drugs with detox and a transition, that they needed medication because it was all going to nursing home with people who were lifelong medicated.
Oh, wow.
So, that's how I got involved. Some people saw my material and knew how committed I was to 12 steps and abstinence and, empowerment and peer involvement. And they said, come show us how you're doing, or be a part of us learning, because, all we do is medications, and it's just gobbling up all our resources. So we can't help the new people in this drug crisis we're in. So anyways, and we're kind of two trains passing in the middle of the night, it looks like.
Mm-hmm. Well,
but anyways, I just want to represent those things in what I
certainly.
do, because it's so important.
Absolutely.
And also the faith piece. A lot of people say we can't talk about God and faith in treatment. So, that gets dismissed.
Mm-hmm. I know. Yet, if you look at evidence-based material, it says that spirituality is something to be considered, but yet we're not allowed to talk about it. So,
right. Absolutely. And nobody really who writes the evidence-based expects people to, to go without spirituality. Nobody expects them to go on medicines for the rest of their life, because there's no science behind that at all. But we drift back to that, and that's what I kind of represent. I don't mind being the guy with the black hat in the picture, but the drug companies and the bureaucracies control things with money in a way that those of us without a lot of resources get jerked around. And that's okay. I just like to point out when it's being driven by science and when it's just being driven by commercial interest.
Certainly. And I'm glad you're that voice. I am.
Well, I piss a lot of people off, but it's kind of what I do. God gives everybody a purpose, and that's my purpose, is to challenge people with bad science.
Well, that's good.
The other way that evidence, there's not a lot of discussion in the addiction world. There's a lot in the medicine scientific world, but there's not a lot of discussion in the the non-medical science world about what is evidence, because evidence-based practice is not drawing out of a list from SAMHSA, because most of the stuff on the SAMHSA evidence list is 30 years old. I wouldn't use it for anything. So it's actually the bad stuff. It's good to start out with as a foundation, but it's been resolved. But evidence changes every year. 3 years ago, they told you not to give your kids peanuts because they develop allergies. And now, within just a couple of years, everybody knows that you got to give your kids peanuts as soon as they start eating, because their body builds up a resistance and never gets allergic if they do it. And we see those flip-flops all the time in science. And if you draw from a list from SAMHSA, you never take advantage of the progression in science.
That's true. Very good point.
And so I'm part of and also with the crazy political world we're in now, I've spent a lot of time nurturing people's ability to think critically and examine the evidence, because sometimes the fake science and, like fake news gets presented as real stuff that we have to discriminate. And the tools for that kind of critical thinking are more important than they've ever been.
Certainly. Well, what I think we can do is, I just really want to nail down something to send to the regional office about what we see as good criteria for vetting treatment providers. So if you don't mind to take a look once again at that document that I sent, and maybe you can just email me some suggestions from that, then I'm going to revise it one more time, send it out to the group one more time, and then send it on to the regional office, because I just don't know that there's anything else that we can accomplish together in this group of individuals right now. So,
and it looks like you tried to reconcile this list at least some with those things that came out of the recovery book, the treatment APGAR.
I did.
And because the clinical criteria is what I'm going to be pressing for, because bureaucratic criteria can be, even though we want something that's established and we want something that has, some validity, we also, some of the criteria for commercial and bureaucratic based programs are things that are harder for people who aren't in it for money and the faith community to meet. So I tend to, and I see you've got some of that in here. I tend to support, clinically based criteria, like, and that's what the whole scoring system I came up with originated with, trying to get parents who were looking for a good place to ask a few questions and know whether they were getting to a good place or not. And because a lot of the places I know that, some of the faith-based and charitable places don't even have, it's just somebody's got a farm that is an AA member in recovery that puts people up and doesn't do much bureaucracy at all, but they get the meetings, they have a sponsor. So if they can get upfront detox, they do very well in those supportive living homes. So it's, and I don't, so anyways, that's kind of what I'm looking for. And you've got some of those criteria in here.
And I tried to, like the first one, that 1A, I said it's a state licensed program, or B, it's a private pay entity that has a board of directors, or C is a nonprofit organization with a registered 501c3 and willing to provide some documentation. So that's why I stated it the way that I did throughout here, was trying to take into consideration all the different moving pieces and people that might want to apply for this. So do you think then it's pretty good as it is?
Yeah, I think you're going to probably have people trying to whittle that down, but I like it being broad. And as long as we're there representing a recovering community and representing faith, I think we can, or I don't mind standing up for including a little broadness, because of my frankly, a lack of trust I have of the way the bureaucracy has vetted programs. They've not done at least in North Carolina, they've not done a very good job.
I agree.
And I don't want to tick more people off than I have to, but I don't mind staking out the turf that I think we can do a good job if we work from it.
Okay.
So I've tried to think how I could include more, and I really can't, because basically if you've got a program that's doing a pretty good job and they're not as organized as normally the state would like them to be, that number 1B, where they've got a board of directors, could be a possibility, where you just say you got to have a board of directors, so your committee, so your decisions are made jointly, not not with one person, running a dictatorship.
Right.
And that's probably a good way. And I think the program that I work with in Charleston would fit that. There are like 4 of us that make decisions, and we could rename that into an official board that would work. But it's not one person who just does everything autocratically.
Well, what do you think about 1E? Because that's an and that says at least half the treatment staff are licensed or trained professionals, because that kind of is broad too. What does training, what does constitute training?
Well, what we've done at our program, and I use that as a model because I've done what I know works, and I just try to build it in. But the way that things are set up in North Carolina, the counselors, people with counseling licenses, can be good in an old-fashioned inpatient program or a very structured outpatient program. But to do a good job, we've got to have people with what I call, lived experience, peers and people like that. And what I interpret that trained peers. Now, what the state is going to have you do is they've decided if you want to collect Medicaid, you have to take the state peer course. And my peer curriculum is very, very different than the state's peer curriculum. Mm-hmm. And matter of fact, that's why I did my curriculum. It's because the state had all kind of crazy stuff, because it was not a substance abuse curriculum. It was a mental health curriculum that was
Oh, yeah.
mandated to be in substance abuse. So as long as we open broadly enough what we mean by trained professionals. Now, peers are not professionals, but I think they come under what I call quasi professionals, because part of my curriculum for training peers with that, to get that lived experience piece of extended care. Now, this doesn't work as well for acute care, detox, and things where you really have a medical issue you've got to get trained people with. But
Mhm.
part of the team, like ACT teams and all that, have peers involved. But
Mhm.
that the courses that I've done for peers, I have my own certification, and people do either 20 or 40 hours of course, and we do things that a person in recovery in AA or even the church would not normally get. A lot of confidentiality training, HIPAA, the what is it, CFR 42 addiction confidentiality, systems, liability. There are a lot of things that we get as professionals that normally you don't get in a lived experience recovery environment. So I try to fold those things in. Matter of fact, I was criticized by the state by doing too much science. I think that it's important for people who are in that, where everybody to know that the science has changed things. It's not like mental health science now. It's more, that some of the neuroplasticity is similar to what AA says, about about building your emotions and brain back from a bad spot. What AA calls the psychic change. And so I talk about how the brain science is very different than the psychiatric brain science, where you're tampering with neurotransmitters. That doesn't work very well, except for the dopamine brain centers. That neurotransmitter science doesn't work very well in addiction education. So there are a lot of things I teach people, even with lived experience, because it empowers their life experience to help train and carry a message to others that they're trying to deal with. Of course, in the church and in AA, most people are doing what they're doing and sharing their experience in a selfish, uh, self-empowering way. And when you move into a lot of the helping in this, you have to switch your perspective to helping others, not just helping yourself.
Helping
And that
yourself.
and that can be a problem for somebody who's been going to AA for 20 years, and it's been all about helping yourself.
Right.
Helping others sometimes looks a little codependent, and there are issues that people have to learn about. So I've folded that into my peer education. So I think,
That's
but as long as we can come back later and define what we mean by trained professionals, and right now it'll go under the tent of what we're doing through our experience, like what you're doing and what I'm doing. I think that'll work.
okay. I'll make a note of that. All right. Well, Al, I'm just going to go ahead and revise this, put a couple of notes in it that we've talked about, and
Okay.
send it back out to the group one more time. And unless I get some feedback one way or another, I'm going to send it on into Mariel and let them do with it, take the next steps with it as they see fit to. Does that
Okay.
sound okay to you?
Yeah. Let me look. I'm trying. One thing that's important to me is every time I go somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't mind being an old white guy talking about addictions, but but diversity has gotten to be a real priority for me, because I'm always looking at an ocean of people that are mostly white, particularly if you get outside the state system. And in AA and in our church and these places that I love so much and know are effective, there's a hurdle in diversity that we really need to emphasize. And so I see you've got some of that, but I just want to emphasize how important diversity is. And I'm involved in a project called Recovery Africa, and I've learned a lot because we actually are promoting recovery in Ghana, which is West Africa.
Oh,
And as
wow.
long as we did it in kind of the American way, nothing ever happened. They tried to promote AA for 25 years over there, and I think they got one person from Africa really to be involved.
Yeah,
Even
it's
though,
got to be culturally
yeah,
relevant.
and what we did is, and it would freak out AA members that are that are used to, and it even probably freak out people in the church. We even though we've got a lot of church involvement, the Catholic Church has been just absolutely wonderful of providing the underpinnings of infrastructure in a lot of ways. But there's some cultural issues that people in America just don't get. You know, I love AA and the kind of recovery we have, but it's Wall Street and big book based. It's a bunch of white men that got sober, which is great. But if we stick to the principles of recovery, but let go of the culture a little bit that AA started in and adapt it. For example, faith is a huge deal in Africa, and family is a huge deal in Africa. And there's some things that I've learned that and that's how we got our Recovery Africa project successful. And now, matter of fact, if you ever wanted to visit, you know, it'd be really, you know, we love to have guests show up and just watch how it works, because we've been doing it for 10 years and it's amazing. But it only happened when we empowered African culture to use these basic principles of recovery that work so well in America. And it's been interesting. I've even had AA members say, you can't do that. You know, you can't have narc agents sponsoring narcotic addicts. And I said, well, you got to go to Africa and tell them that.
Yeah.
Because there was no NA, there was no AA. And the law enforcement people said, well, our job is to reduce the drug problem. It's not to arrest people. And so we've actually had narcs over there, what they call the Narcotic Control Board, start meetings and sponsor people and not arrest them, because they would, you know, they felt like if they were sober carrying a message of recovery, the drug problem would get better, which is exactly what's happened. And so in some ways, they're more advanced than we are. My ultimate goal, and I've been upfront with our Africans about it, my ultimate goal is to get something so successful that we can write it up and document it and repatriate the elements of success back to the U.S. And one of them, like you said, we get pushed out the door if we talk about faith. Well, that's a bonding element over there that's really, really important. Cigarette smoking over here, you know, cigarettes are a big part of, I think of cigarettes as being harm reduction for alcohol. And I don't argue with it because I'm not going to change it over here. Right. But if you smoke a cigarette in Ghana, they jerk you up and throw you back in detox. I mean, it's like that, you know, when they say substances, they mean substances.
They mean all substances.
Yeah. And so one day we'll begin to look at some of those things as we can build on things with them. And as a Southerner, it's been real interesting to me, because if you watch the news, you think of being Southern as, you know, talking about the Civil War and waving Confederate flags and all that. And I've had to really look at my identity as a Southerner. Yes. And this African experience, I had to analyze, why do I have so much affinity for Africa? And what I've come to the conclusion is because when I was growing up, my mom and dad were in various institutions. We had African American domestic help that were like parents and kids, brothers and sisters and family to me, because when my mom and dad disappeared, those are the people that took me and raised me. Wow. And so there's some elements that, you know, that a lot of these, you know, more alt-right conservative people would have no appreciation for, that I've had to open my mind and absorb. But what it's done for me is it's given me a real deep appreciation and gratitude for diversity in programming. So I like how you've included that in there, and I will always press for diversity, because there's so much cultural diversity that we need in our kind of European and independent orientation over here, that I've watched in other cultures do very, very well when they get beyond the self-centeredness of American, you know, beliefs in the Declaration of Independence and that, which is great. I love freedom, you know, but not including family and generations and all that really leaves us coming up lacking.
It does.
So anyways, I don't mean to get into my lecture mode, but I appreciate you saying things about diversity.
Yes. Well, good. Well, thank you, Al. Once again, I appreciate your time today. I'll send this back out, and hopefully at our next meeting we'll have some more people involved. I'm not really sure where to go from here, so I might look for some direction from Mary and her team to kind of give us a new project or help us know what the next steps are. But I'll keep you posted on that. And thank you again for for
Well,
coming in on
thanks for your leadership, because my life is so scattered and in some ways chaotic that if I can have a point to show up and be involved, I can do it. But homework and organizing are not really my strong point. So I really appreciate, your leadership and
well, thank you.
in this thing moving on, and anything
Thank
we can do to get more people involved. And sometimes, one of the strange things, I watched this in our Africa project, is some people don't like to be in, there's just a discomfort with being involved with things that are intangible. And I
Mhm.
love the intangible, because that's when we really can formulate things in a creative way. Once
Yes.
they're already, once the train's left the station with structure and organization, it's hard to change it.
You're
So I've always been kind of surprised that people don't want to get in at this level. So there's kind of an advantage to just having a few people who are committed to the creative part, and I'll do that. And if it gets too many people, I'll probably just move on and do something else. But
Well, I don't think we're going to need to worry about that, not judging from the
well,
past 2 or 3 meetings, but I understand everybody's busy, and I get that, and I am too, but I don't mind at all to schedule a meeting and facilitate it. I just want to make sure we're getting something accomplished. So I'll send this out, and we'll see what comes next. But in the meantime, thank you, Al, and I hope that you can get inside now and get out of the heat.
Yeah, you see the sun's beginning to hit me now. I told you it was going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't have my sunblock on, but maybe they're finished enough inside for me to go back in. Well, thank you so much, too, for your leadership and planning and structure here. And keep me posted. I can't make every time, but I'm glad that we had a chance to kind of review things today. And I appreciate your work you've put in.
Thank you, Al. Well, God bless you, and you have a good afternoon.
You do, too. Take care. See you. Bye-bye.